TV. So if you can't hear me, I'll try to speak up. This is not, we don't have a PA system in here. But what I'd like to do is, many of you were here at, was it February 23rd?
23rd, on a Saturday.
On a Saturday at the Village Center. Where we had our first workshop, and we had a tour of a couple of a bus going around and giving a tour, and we had also some breakout sessions. The Cecil group took those the comments and the input from that, and then came up with some ideas. I'd like to at this point introduce Ken Buckland from the Cecil group. What we're going to do is he's going to go through some slideshows and speak about the ideas and how they came about, and then we're going to open it up to everyone out there so you can have your input and your comments. Hopefully you'll picked up one of the handouts that we had, and if you have any, we also have a website where I've posted some of these maps and reports on our town webpage. If you can go out there and take a look at it, and we're always open for any kind of comments, either if you want to do them verbally tonight, or if you want to write them, send them over to me at the town hall, or come in and stop in at the office and chat a little bit. All those work. So, without further ado, Ken Buckland.
Thanks, Jose, and thank you everybody for coming out tonight as well too. How many of you were at the Saturday workshop? Great. So you know what you said. If I don't repeat it here, let me know. How many people are town officials? And how many people are property owners? Good, good. As Jose said, we've got about 75 different ideas at the Saturday workshop meeting. We've also had interviews where we've interviewed some of the people in this room on some ideas about what people want to see for the future of Thompsonville. And so what we're trying to do is get to the point where we can start to build that consensus. So I'm going to be presenting some ideas tonight, and we're going to have that discussion. As Jose says, it's going to be a conversation so that we continue the process and build, because it needs a majority vote to pass the zoning regulations. That means that there has to be political will to make this happen, and that comes from people in the room as well as those people at elsewhere within the town that may be listening in as well too. What I'm going to do is go a little bit over what we're talking about in terms of the study, what we're trying to accomplish. Talk about these zoning amendment concepts. These are concepts at this point, and then talk about the next steps that come along. Can everybody in the back hear me as well too? Can everybody in the middle hear me? This is the boundary of Thompsonville that we had decided on with town staff, that runs along the interstate highway out to the river, down to the high school, or at the school at the bottom here, and the cemetery that exists at the top of the piece. In here is the commercial district for Enfield Street. So, in approaching this, we looked over the properties. We've done the GIS analysis. We figured out what kind of properties there are, how big they are, what the average size and value of these properties. We've looked a little bit at the market potential of what's available to the village in terms of some improvements. And we've done the technical information, but what we need now is to set some goals. What are we trying to accomplish with this? Because there's so many different ways to go about this. What we want to do is get some structure and start to work it down to the details. So we came up with a series of goals from what we've heard. First off, implement the Thompsonville Revitalization Action Plan. And there are a series of recommendations that come out of the revitalization plan that I think are pertinent to the zoning. And a few of those I'll read off. The adoption of zoning policies and practices that encourage desired businesses and residential development. The expansion of the Thompsonville Village District for more mixed-use development opportunities. And the adoption of a comprehensive revitalization plan for the village and expansion of home ownership opportunities. Along with that plan, we started to think about what else could we use to try to try to understand and organize what we're trying to accomplish. And we looked at the idea of, can we create a true village center? And I think, unlike a lot of other places that may be somewhat artificial, you can actually create a real village center with the structure that you have in place, the buildings, the roads, and the infrastructure that's in place right now. And it could be, it could be even more interesting place as a location. And along with that comes the idea of supporting and reinforcing the existing historical, commercial, residential buildings, the forms that are in place, revitalizing them, renovating them, and making them as part and as new development to have fit into that as part of the overall plan of how the redevelopment could occur. And lastly, because this has some real value to the town as well as the long-range future of the Thompsonville Village, is to build a transit center. Make it easier to get from here to there. Make it easier for people to make those links and those connections through the region. And there'll be more people coming. There'll be more investment in the location as a result. It's been proven out in many different locations. So, given those goals, one of the things we did then next, based on the input we've got, was to say, well, are there some areas that probably should remain or don't need some major significant change in what happens in those areas? And we didn't hear anything about the business districts along Enfield Street except for the southern end of it. And what we heard was that there is a design regulation in place. There have been some reinvestment along Enfield Street, and there has been some success in the negotiation for good quality development that comes along with that. So the idea being that maybe that general business and the limited business start to work very well, especially with the Enfield Street Design Overlay District on top of it. The other two areas were on this particular map were the historic, the HR 33 district down in the southern end of our study area, which is on the east side of Enfield Street, and this strip of residential development along the river on the western side of the railroad tracks. You have to get access through Main Street. You're going to, in the future, just through Main Street to come down and make those connections to those properties. That the ones on the southern side were in pretty good shape and should be reinforced as to the idea that they are a future enclave of residential development, residential uses. Other areas that were recommended for remaining the same were that large area of residential development below Route 190 that exists down there. And I should point out that there's been some discussion about whether or not even the zoning there should change to try to reinforce the existing pattern of development, the size of the lots in particular. So the zoning does not create a lot of nonconformities. You try to get more conformity with the proposed zoning in place. So there may be something here that suggests some change for at least the dimensions of within that district. What we'll do is, because there's R33 all over the town, we'll look at what else is in place around the town and see how that plays out and see if there's something consistent that we can apply to all the R33 districts. The last two areas that will remain are the industrial zoning district, which includes the lumberyard and adjacent vacant property, and the Bigelow Mill property, the SD Special Design District that's in place, because people find that to be successful, and like what's happened, it seems to have worked as a zoning district overlay, so it continues on as part of that location. So then we come to the zoning changes, and these are the concepts we've presented. We're going to present to think about how does this play out in terms of what you're thinking and how that works for overall in terms of the revitalization of the Thompsonville Village. You probably, or you might know, there's a little, first the smallest one, there's a little bit of a shopping, a strip mall right at the intersection of High Street and Enfield Street. and that is actually not zone business. And so the idea was to make that conforming with the district that's the district that's put in place on top of it, and make it a business district. Put it as a limited business, a BL district at that location over that piece of it. Then coming up north of Alden Street, right now there's the R33 and the Thompsonville Village district that exists up here. What we're proposing is a residential district, predominantly residential, to put over top of that, and to try to make more of those units of those properties conforming to the zoning, so that there is maybe some more there's an opportunity for a reinvestment as long as it meets the historical criteria that the town has put in place. And I'll go through these districts in a little more detail in the slides that follow, but just to give you the overview. And then lower below that, in this shown in here in the light green, is the Thompsonville Village mixed-use design district. We call it mixed use because we're looking at the idea of both commercial and residential within that district. And it would extend all the way down to Franklin Street at the southern end and out to Enfield Street. And lastly, on the map, this multimodal transit river access district along the waterfront, which is on the opposite side of opposite side of the railroad tracks from the Bigelow Mill property. And so, why don't we walk through those, and I'll give you a little bit more detail about these ones. I think hopefully I explained this idea, including the small commercial property at the southern end of the BL district, and essentially extend the BL district to incorporate the small shopping center as part of that district. And then, so let's turn to the residential, because this is what we tried to do was think about what do you try to accomplish. We have these goals, but we also may be trying to accomplish other land use objectives within the district. And what would we think would be the metrics, the way to direct this particular development within this zoning district. And we're talking about, unfortunately I can't focus this more because of the audio-visual equipment that's in place, so people at home can see this. So when you get back home, watch the repeat of the session and you'll be able to read the screen again. But let me read it through. The use mix, 98% residential. We expect there'll be a little bit of non-residential development in there, but a small portion of it. So we're trying to accomplish that this is a residential, these are residential blocks, this is a residential district. The residential density, because this is pretty close to what's existing, would be 10 to 20 units, dwelling units per acre, and we're talking about 20 to 40 people per acre. This is not part of the zoning regulations. These are just the way that we think that the development might go under this particular zoning district. A jobs to housing ratio would be essentially, with a low percentage of commercial, that there may be some people with home occupations within those locations, but the fact is we'd be looking at really not a job producing zoning district, so 0 jobs per dwelling unit. FAR is floor area ratio. Now, an FAR, and you don't have that in your zoning regulations right now, but a floor area ratio means if we had, say, this room is an acre in size, and if we had a floor area ratio of 1, that means the building would cover the whole property. Of course, it wouldn't do that because you couldn't have parking. So what happens is it becomes a 2-story or a 3-story building, and with parking and open space adjoining that building. So when we think about FAR, we think about, that's another way of looking at the intensity and density of development that could take place on a piece of property. I know that there have been there's a zoning article in process right now on changing some of the coverage requirements within the zoning regulations. What we've done is we've also suggested that there is some maximum impervious surface of 70% within this district. Our maximum parking is 2 spaces per residential unit, or as may fit the district. And one of the things we want to accomplish with this is to say, in the front yard, we don't want a lot of parking because that's going to ruin the character of the area. We want the parking to be on the sides of the properties or in the rear of the property if possible. So the idea of as that parking fits, maybe it has to work out in terms of what the particular lot and the development is. Our standards would be that it promotes residential use. That's going to be the principal use of these properties, residential. It's going to decrease the minimum size of the parcel to 8,500 square feet. Now, this is about the average. That means it isn't going to cover all of the properties and make them all conforming, but it's going to make the majority of the properties conforming by going to 8,500 square feet. Now, here's what we're trying to accomplish with this idea that we heard about trying to improve home ownership within the district as well too. That there will be allowed, as of right, 2 units per lot, 2 units per building. It would be allowed at 4 units per building. You could double the density if one of the units is owner occupied. That means if one of the owners is living in there, then that becomes, you can increase the density and make more money off of your property, essentially. And it would incorporate the design guidelines that are already in place. They're the established design guidelines about the preservation of historic character within the zoning district. Our next district is on the waterfront. And this is where there have been a number of different plans put in place. And what we're talking about is creating a zoning district that says, what's the most important goal for this property right now? And that's the transit orientation. That's to get transit in place. And that was our biggest goal. Other development may come forward, and it may make sense, in which case the town can negotiate and rezone the property for that purpose. But what we're trying to do now, what are the biggest points we wanted to accomplish? Well, we heard riverfront access and transit. And so that becomes the biggest part of what this opportunity is. We don't take away all the opportunities, of course, because along with transit, and especially in the more suburban areas, you need a lot of parking. Parking could be public, but it also could be private. You could have private parking facilities within this district that works towards supporting the transit. The residential density is medium-low. We're not talking about a lot of residential development within this area because we're trying to accomplish other goals. The jobs, housing ratio, we're thinking about 5 jobs per housing unit, and the idea that if there's anything related to transit and a transit center that comes along with that opportunity. And the FAR, the range of FAR from a low because of the preservation of river access and the access to a high of 2, an FAR of 2, which means probably something more like a 3-4 story building would be taking place on the properties. A reduced impervious surface. This is only 60% impervious surface here compared to the 70% for the other district because we have a floodplain here as well too, and that takes out a portion of the property right off, and so we think that there'd be an appropriate dimension response to that. And then the parking becomes 2 spaces per residential unit, 1 space per 1,000 square feet of commercial parking, and as needed for the transit center. Height of buildings and structures within a district would be associated with the idea that there could be, if it's for the purpose of access over the tracks or something to do with the transit, then that dimension could be would be increased for that purpose. The key standards are that it would require the accessibility to the river and supporting transit, that there is an allowance for private parking facilities, and we have medium density residential. Now, this isn't the only plan that's been in place, and I just want to bring up one concept here that's not on the slideshow that you have in the handout. And unfortunately, because it's hard to read this one here. But there have been different plans for the development of the waterfront, and this particular one has a transit station and residential development along the waterfront. This was done by PCA. This was done back in November of 2006 with public facilities on the property as well too. It may be appropriate in some cases to think about some redevelopment that takes place. However, it's very difficult to try to demand changes in land use from property owners through zoning. And what we found overall is it's best when you negotiate, when there's a partnership between the private property owners and the town in negotiating and designing the zoning that's created for the purpose of meeting both the goals of the development and the town's goals for opportunity on the waterfront. So what we're suggesting is that there could be another process that takes place beyond this. But in our zoning study, we don't have that opportunity to start making those negotiations on the development potential on the waterfront. So what we're doing is taking what we have as our goals, our set goals, and what we're trying to accomplish, and how that plays through.
Before you change that, are you showing public access on this plan?
This plan does show. this is not my plan.
Well, I know it's
It does.
It's an option.
It does show public access.
Are you showing actual public access location
What-
from north
what-
to south on this plan?
What this does is this shows not a continuous public access north and south. What it shows, except on the roadway, what it shows is that there are alleyways out to the riverfront for getting access to the river. So your access is along the road that links all the properties,
Right.
or out through between the buildings and out to the waterfront.
But would it just be the alley front width of the alley that allows you at the river, or is there space
No,
that
there
you
are
can walk
spa-
along the river?
There are spaces where they're public gathering spaces and opening up something more substantial on the
But they're
waterfront.
broken. It's not continuous.
But it's not continuous.
Okay.
The continuity is on the road itself, not on the waterfront itself. But of course, this is something that could be discussed with a potential development partner as to how that plays through. Now, one of the more interesting opportunities is this mixed-use design district, or we're calling it TMD, Thompsonville Village Mixed-Use Design District, which we take from Alden, from the outside of the Enfield Street and the business districts along there down to Franklin and up along the industrial property and along the railroad tracks and around the Bigelow again, back to create something that says this whole area is a village, and it's not an artificial village. It's a real village, and in a real village, what you have is over time small changes that take place, and some businesses that come in, and people that start to change the operation of their properties over time to follow the market and what's potential within this particular district. And so what we're saying is that there's an opportunity here for both commercial and residential development mixed together as a real village. Our mix of residential and commercial, non-residential, or could be institutional uses as well too, is 80-20. We're talking about 80% residential still, because that's what drives people, or what make up a location, not necessarily the buildings alone. It's the people. So we're saying that 80% of it, this is residential. 20% could be non-residential. Our residential density goes up somewhat to 12 to 25 dwelling units per acre, and 25 to 50 people per acre. We're talking about 2 people per unit, with smaller size units as well too. It could be even less in this case, with potential for live workspace in here as well too. And at that opportunity, we could have up to 1 job per every 2 dwelling units, depending on how this plays out as a development potential. 80% impervious surface coverage, so a little more intense development within that area, and parking that fits with the requirements of the individual pieces of residential and commercial, and encouraging shared parking for that purpose as well. the dimensions within this district follow the Thompsonville Village Center district that's in place. So it allows that you can go down to 4,500 square feet per lot. It's for that more intensive development within that area. There would be a core area within this, and if you look at the map on the back over here of the proposed zoning, you'll see that shaded area highlighted within the green of the Thompsonville mixed-use district, which would be the core area. This is where the existing Thompsonville Village commercial district lies right now, with the idea you're going along Pearl Street, you're on High Street, where the more intensive commercial development already is in place. And so that becomes this more intensive core location, where ground floor retail and active uses would be encouraged. So the idea that you want to have retail uses on the first floor. You'd want to have uses that create an activity along the street. But knowing that there'd be other uses that could be permitted as well too. Again, the idea that live-work units would be permitted and that the historic preservation design guidelines apply. Now, one of the things that is interesting about your local regulations is you have design districts that were in place before the state law allowed design districts. But now state law has caught up, and there's a provision within state law that says you can create a design district. And the fact is that this could fit quite nicely, and you could adopt the same design district regulations you have in place formally within the zoning code for the purpose of regulating the kind of the style and quality of development. All right, so we've gone through the zoning. One last piece I want to talk about is the process, because what we've tried to do, if you noticed in a few instances, was try to make it easier for the existing development to be conforming and so be able to improve those properties. And in the review process right now, you have a two-step design review process where there's a design review of the property, and then it goes to the commission for approval for the permits, which is an onerous process from what we've heard. What we're suggesting is something that might be a little bit easier, where in the first step, the revitalization committee that already has a role within the zoning regulations for review would complete the review with the project. And so by doing so, let the owner know what's appropriate and what isn't, and how the project should be changed if needed to make it conform to the standards. If the owner, if the proponent of the project agrees, then they can go right and get a building permit with those changes or whatever else is necessary in place. If they don't agree, a second step is possible. And that's where you go to the commission, and essentially you're asking for, can you give me a waiver of those?
Only an advisory role. It's not. They aren't a recognizable state land use board. They're an advisory board to planning and zoning. And you're giving them total control over quite large areas that would entail zoning regulations.
And so you'd rather have a
They should remain as they are, as an advisory to them, but not have the total control, because again, I don't know what the legality would be if somebody went and did changes with them, but they're not a recognizable land use board by state regulations.
Well, essentially, this is a process within the building commissioner's purview, that you're issuing a permit by right. There's advisory input from this committee that comes into that process of a by right.
Well, it depends upon what they're doing.
Yes.
It totally depends on what they're doing.
Yes.
And by the statement here, you're giving them total approval of areas within that TMD and the MTRA, which is a total lot of area. And I'm sure a lot of what they do now is advisory to the people that are doing any business down there. And they've done some good work. They've done a lot of good advisory work. But again, it's not binding at present because they don't have the rule of law.
And it wouldn't be necessarily be binding either in this case. What I'm saying is if the proponent of the project accepts their recommendations.
How would it be legal as far as whatever work they've done on the project?
Because it's based on issuance of a building permit for the project. So it comes to the building commissioner as their decision
Oh, but they
with
can
that
do
input
more
from
things
the.
than just building.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
There would be no commission review because it's by right.
Right.
There would be design review.
I think what he's saying is you will define what types of uses, like, a lot of times, anything,
person at
you
a time.
change your siding, you change your windows, it has to go to the commission under the current regulations. So, again, this is all going to be fleshed out, but there will be certain things that the commission will say, okay, you can just go in and get a building permit if you get a favorable review from the RSC. So these will be as of right, just like as right now in any other district, if you want to change your siding or change your windows, all you got to do is get a building permit.
but did they bypass the ART?
If it was needed, I mean, again, I think what we're going to do is define the types of uses and the types of permits that will fall under that limited exception.
Well,
Obviously, if somebody's changing the use or demolishing or reconstructing a new building, that would have to go through full commission review. But things like siding, windows, that normally would go to the building department anyway without commission approval in any other zone, perhaps we want to have a little bit better design control in Thompsonville. We have that added step of referring it to the ERSC, and then if the person agrees with their recommendations, they just get a building permit. If they don't, then
we've
they have to
talked
go
about having
PZC.
For years
Yeah.
about having a professional design commission or committee. I don't know. I hate to bypass ART because they are professionals and they know their business.
Okay.
So there's still discussion on the process,
Or
obviously.
else this should have been fully defined as what exactly it is you wanted to do rather than just a broad statement.
Well, we're taking the concepts now. In fact, I wasn't even sure that this would fly with the town as to the idea of having a simpler review, because a lot of towns like to have a more complex and a more and essentially costly and more difficult review as the process.
They do a good job, but that's what they are, is an advisory group, and it's not it's not as I say, a professional or recognizable land use board by the state.
Then we don't necessarily have to pick them as
I
the
know.
design review authority either in this case for the building commissioner.
Design review would be fine. I talked to Jose about it. If you had somebody like Peter and Jose and let's say the building inspector to if you're doing design review for downtown, because they're professionals in their area.
Well, I
That
have another
doesn't
comment
bother
up in
me.
front here as well, too.
Just to speak to what Charlie's talking about, I understand his concern about their changing from an advisory group, but they remain an advisory group to planning and zoning under the issues and types of permits that require going to the commission. I think what you're talking about is merely creating another job for them to do in the administrative process of the building department. So they're not really making land use decisions. They're merely enforcing, and not really enforcing. They're reviewing proposals to make sure that they meet the design standards, whether you're calling them design guidelines or historic guidelines. I'm not quite sure what you mean by those two phrases. But it allows for an even-handed application of those guideline requirements across the board, so that everybody is responsible to adhere to them.
Correct. There'll be consistency on how you actually apply the design regulations. Jose, did you want to add something?
No, I just was wondering if you wanted just to finish up and then have the save your comments after,
Well,
for discussion
no,
after.
actually,
so-
this was exactly the point where I wanted to have the conversation
All right.
start. Here we are for questions and comments. So,
Fantastic.
good discussion so far on process. Obviously, a little bit of work to do on that. I actually thought the first comments would be on the zoning, the districts as well too. But
There's got to be.
So we only have one microphone to go to the audience. So if you want to, if you want to speak, let me just raise your hand. I'll get you the microphone. Just identify yourself.
I have a question on riverfront access. You talk about there being breaks on the property from a road that I assume is to be built going north from Main Street north on North River. When you cross over private property, who is liable for any issues that happen?
there is a limitation of liability that's possible through state law on if you provide public access. That's true public access that's provided through the easements that you provide. But now I want you touch on a point about the road. Now, that kind of development only takes place if you have access, and there are two aspects to that. One is access underneath the train tracks, and that is possible by the program, apparently, that the state has promised the town to improve the single point of access along North Main Street underneath to the riverfront. The other is access to the properties, and there already is an easement in place right now linking up all the properties that exist.
No, it's for one property. It's not for all the properties.
Well, somehow everybody's crossing that
Somehow
property.
they are, but it's the easement is to one property, not to all
And you're familiar
five.
with adverse possession, of the idea that you continue access for a number of years, 10 years or so.
That's not
and then
my
it becomes
question.
part
My
of the
question
access.
is, if I invite people, well, first of all, you have to understand the topography. Starting from Main Street going south along the river, you could walk into the river without having to jump off a bank or anything. The land slopes gently into the river. North of Main Street, different story. There's bulkheads. The land is as much as 14 feet as much as a 14-foot drop into the river. When you invite people onto your property, when there's a known danger, I think you have a lot more liability than the state is gonna limit you to.
You know, I've been since I think I started back in the 1980, back in Stamford, Connecticut, getting public access all over the waterfront, across all kinds of private property. I haven't heard of one suit about the liability, and we were building public access on top of hurricane barriers down there, which were at least 14 feet high. So it's possible, and part of it's engineering, and part of it's the design of whatever is developed in a property, because you're not going to build public access on its own unless the town owns it, unless it's publicly owned, or it fits with a development project that comes along. And those two pieces, as I said, have to be negotiated as part of that design process. And it works best, we find, with a public-private partnership in coming up with the regulations. and
I
the design in
understand
place.
when it's publicly owned, but when it's privately owned, I'm not sure you're absolved from any issue that could arise. Something silly. In 1977, we had a tornado. The water coming down the river in front of my property is normally 14 feet. The top of the river, since the dam was blown out in '55, the height of the river most of the year is 14 feet below the top of the bulkhead. 1977, during the tornado, the water came within 2 feet of the top of the bulkhead. That was a rise at that point of some 12 feet.
And
Somebody
you'd have
falls
to design
into-
for that purpose, but I doubt there'd be too many people walking out there when the storm of that nature is in place. So, there are a number of different scenarios that could take place, but we don't have all those. We don't have it designed at this point. We don't have that laid out. So I think it's a fun discussion, but I don't think it necessarily gets us where we want to go with the zoning.
It's fun until you're the one who owns the property and people are going on it by invitation.
And that won't happen unless there is a development process in place and the property owner is satisfied that it works for them as well. And that's what I'm talking about. Setting up a process where you negotiate that with the private property owners and the public access that comes along with it. And I know of your particular interest in this because of your ownership along the waterfront as being very important as in this case. And I'm looking at you and thinking, you're exactly the guy that should be sitting down with the town officials and starting to think about how do we actually make this work as a project in the waterfront and meet these goals, because this is what I'm hearing: waterfront access and transit are the goals. How do we make that happen? And that's where that dialogue has to take place.
Second question I have for you is on the what is it, the
MTRA,
multimodal
multimodal transit and
property.
riverfront access.
You came up with a building height of 45 feet. How did you arrive at 45 feet?
45 was based on what we'd seen elsewhere in the regulations. It was an estimate of what we'd seen other transit facilities play out as
You
well.
are aware that the bigger buildings at Bigelow, the new Axminster building at the west end of it is 88 feet high. So we
We don't necessarily want to block all the views of Bigelow either if it hasn't taken place. I mean, the fact is we can think about different heights, and I think that in what we're looking at as the concept is this idea that maybe we negotiate that height as part of it if there's a different footprint for buildings, or if it's for the purpose of transit that makes sense for it elsewhere.
Well, the reason I bring that up is because in all of the charrettes that have gone on at the Lyceum, people get together to talk about what sort of development should go with intermodal transportation and the rail service. They talk about high density. The closer to the rail station, the higher the density.
And the density that makes rail work is we're talking about the idea of 50, 60 dwelling units per acre. That's not a suburban, that's not a village density. So what we have to find is something that works for Enfield, Thompsonville, and the property that's available for redevelopment. And that's part of that process as well too. This idea of density, one of the opportunities with transit is that change happens. You can get better businesses in there. You can get more people taking that opportunity for transit and using it for connection to jobs in the region. The idea is that if we figure out what works for transit in Thompsonville, what is the density that's appropriate for this location, then we can structure the zoning appropriately. But one of the things we want to do is think about is this going to remain a village? And if so, then we want to have the structure appropriate to that kind of density. And that's where we've come up with those density standards.
I don't want to. Thank you. I don't want to take it all over, or take up all your time. I have a couple of questions. One about parking. You mentioned trying to get people to agree not to parking in front, which is admirable because I own a property that is affected by people that park on the grass in the front. But in relation to that, I was hoping you might talk about, or you had discussed already, not using street parking in calculations for parking any longer because we don't have enough parking, especially during snowstorms.
No, as a matter of fact, we did consider that street parking would remain as part of that. Is this
as a calculation?
As part of the calculation of parking demand within
See,
the
we already have
district.
problems. If you can't,
Let me clarify on the front yard too. What we're saying is not trying to keep people off it, but say you cannot, by zoning, you cannot park, you cannot put a parking space in the front of your property, in the front yard of your property, or just in front of the building, not just the front yard, because that could be a different setback,
Right.
but in front of the building. You
but
can't put,
we'd have to live with anything pre-zoning change because you can't.
if there's no parking space there, then it's not a pre-existing non-conforming. It's just
Okay.
an inappropriate use
Got
of
you.
of the property.
Got you. We already have a problem, you know, in a large part of the year where when it snows, people can't park on the street, which is normal anywhere. However, if the parking is restricted part of the year, how can you continue to use street parking in the calculation when you can't depend on it year-round? You know what I'm saying? Unless the town is ready to put in parking garages all over Thompsonville.
How many people live in Thompsonville, in the residential areas? And how many of you park on the street? None of you. So you all have off-street parking in that. Yeah.
A lot of people do
Yeah.
have off-street parking. That's just one thing I wanted to bring up. You also mentioned about allowing up to 4 units if one is owner-occupied. What if the building is sold? I mean, how will the zoning actually prohibit them all becoming rental units? One will always have to be occupied. How would we administer that?
That's administered through the building inspector's office and code, the health code as well too.
Okay.
These are general regulations as well as zoning regulations that can
Okay.
apply to the use of the property.
And one more quick observation. I see the TVR and the
TMD,
yeah,
TM.
TMD.
That's the mixed-use development,
And you're
the large
talking
green
about-
area.
You talk about 2 different design guidelines. One is the design guidelines and one is historic preservation guidelines. We have design guidelines for the Thompsonville Village District, which I can see applying to the TMD. When we did the historic study for a National Register district, which is just honorary and gives people incentives, you know, if their buildings will be worth more in the long run. The northern part of Thompsonville, where you only have the is it TVD?
TVR,
TVR.
the Thompsonville residential.
There were proportionately an equal number of buildings eligible for the National Register, which means architectural detailing. So is there an actual difference when you're talking about guidelines on protecting the exteriors of buildings? Because we don't have preservation design guidelines.
What you have.
We don't have historic preservation design guidelines. Are you saying we need to create a new set?
What you have, and I'll pull out is Appendix B, Historic Rehabilitation Standards and Guidelines for the Village of Thompsonville.
Right.
Which was adopted March 2009.
Right.
These are the regulations. These are the guidelines, design
Okay.
guidelines I'm talking
Applying to both?
about. Applying to both.
Okay. So it's just a misprint in here where they're design guidelines. They're both the same. You're talking the same thing.
Yes.
Wonderful. That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. In the back. Run, Jose.
Hi, thank you for coming out and presenting again. I appreciate it. Just a couple quick things on the parking. I agree that it's tough with on-street parking, particularly in the areas around Alden Avenue. However, if you look is it South Road where the house is?
South Road, or
South
Street?
The one in Thompsonville. There's South Street. There's several houses down there that on their properties have 4-car bays. And the beauty of that is it still remains residential. It's not some huge parking monstrosity. However, it gives the homeowners an opportunity to offer parking to houses where maybe there are 3 cars, 4 cars for a house, and they get a little bit of revenue. So, I mean, I think that Thompsonville's already kind of worked that out for itself.
Interesting. The shared parking concept
Right.
has already taken
So
place.
there's some whole, there's some whole pieces of property. That's what they have. They have a 4 or 5 bay garage, and typically they're, I don't know about anymore, but for years they were family owned. Someone owned the house next door to it, and then they were able to rent that out. So Thompsonville's been pretty creative. I think that the parking, if that could maybe be extended, if that would be okay, to write in there that something of a small size would be acceptable on a property, just to protect folks and give them that opportunity. The other question I had was on the mixed-use buildings, where there'd be a business downstairs.
The first floor residential,
Yes.
not first floor residential, but first floor retail or service
First
businesses.
floor
yeah.
retail. I was wondering, could a similar rule maybe be applied to that, where if you own the business downstairs, you were able to build more units above, provided you remained owner of that property? Or
Interesting idea. So the incentive is if you remain as the owner of the property or live on the property, then you can build more units above the retail
right, if
uses.
you own that store and you run that store
Good
yourself.
concept, yeah.
Because clearly, if you're running the store, you're not going to want a bunch of, unattended units upstairs that aren't being cared for. If you own that business, you want your business to be presentable. You're going to want the apartments above to be presentable. And possibly, and I don't know if this is part of it, can it be written in there that could be rent or condo? Just because that's something that I think has worked in other towns above businesses is to rent, actually sell
Typically
condos.
under zoning, you don't deal with whether it's rental or ownership
Okay.
units.
So that would just be
You
up
can do
to
that
the
through other
individual.
incentive programs.
Okay.
But typically, you let the market decide whether or not it's rental or ownership.
So it's nothing that would be restricted then with these rules.
That's correct. It wouldn't be
Okay.
restricted.
Great, thank you.
How you doing? My name is Thomas Fromm at 19 Nancy Drive, Enfield. The TVR, which is in place right now, I was under the impression of over the last 4.5 years that we were looking to try to make everything more uniform. And what we're doing here is adding another layer of bureaucracy on the TMD and the TVR. Now, we have the Enfield Revitalization Committee, who helps you with when you bring ideas in and works with you to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission, all on to get everybody on the same page.
And you like that process?
Well, that process has worked.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you go to the Planning and Zoning Commission, either with or without their blessing. You still have that opportunity to do so. But the Planning and Zoning Commission is what has the ultimate say. Now, bringing the whole idea of the study was to bring more properties into uniform conformity. Why are we stopping at Alden Avenue and extending the existing TVR and then moving it to TVD? Because we have, as you said in your statement earlier, we can already reduce the property down to 4,500 square feet and to put the second lot on the property.
Right.
You also turn around, and to allude to what Roger stated, the four-family, if one of them's owner-occupied, that's fine. But I believe that our regulations allow, if you have 4 units on one piece of property, they can be sold as individual units already. So they don't have to be that.
Here's look at the map on the left back
Yeah,
over there.
I
It's
will look
it's
at the
all
map.
right now. Most of the properties we're talking about in the TVR district and the expansion within the TMD district, the Thompsonville, are 33,000 square feet per lot, which means that they're not conforming, and they have to go to the building process,
And we have a special use permit process in place for that.
Right, and what we're saying is because what we heard, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, was that the special use process is rather onerous in a lot of cases, and so what it does is it means disinvestment and people not reinvesting in their property as a result of the difficulty of going through that kind of process. So one of the concepts was, let's make the zoning try to fit more closely, make more people conforming to the regulations so they don't have to go through that process. And that was the reason for going through that advisory process to the as of right units, so you don't have to go to the commission for the review. You can get your permit and proceed as long as you fit the requirements for the regulations.
And I do understand that. But what you look at here is Alden Avenue, and we have a TVC district that started to extend out. And this is the concentrated area that needed to be brought back into the TVC. Now, through a 2-year process, we had finally got a spot area to go into the left side of, which would be the west side of Windsor Street and the north side of Church Street, to adjoin Thompsonville Village Center, which they did here. But what you do in your maps here now is you cut this off. And then what we were trying to do, or what my thought was, or what I was understanding is, we were trying to bring this all back under one big blanket so that they don't have to go through the process. And yes, the special use process is expensive and more permits and a little bit done, but what I did realize when I was going through it, there are reasons for this to be in place. We can make it a little simpler if everything's all folded under one thing, but you're taking an impervious from 85% existing right now down to 70%. You're changing, we have 0 lot lines. Everything's basically in place with all this put together. I mean, we're talking decades of work that's been put here, and now we want to just kind of get it all back together, and we're separating it again. It's just my opinion.
And so what you would suggest is that we take something like the TMD district and the TVC district, as we have that green area, and extend it up all the way over to the TVR district as well too. So it's all one.
I truly don't believe that you need a TVM. I think we just need to extend the TVR. That's just my opinion.
The existing, you're talking about the existing zoning.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah.
I may have something to add what Tommy's talking about. I agree that we've been trying to make the village or I believe that we were trying to make the entire census tract fall under the easiest administrative processes and with the best positive reactions as far as financial worth, real estate worth and all of that. What I can point out for you, and it may help somewhat with what Tommy's saying, I know of at least 5 sites in the TVR that were neighborhood-oriented services, whether they were offices or little markets. One was a bakery. So I can see where Tommy would be reluctant to remove that potential neighborhood within restrictions. Yeah, to have little neighborhood business or services, or allow an attorney's office to go in, or a little art studio, or a little shop of some sort that sells whatever, baskets or antiques or whatever.
Right.
But there are legitimate locations in that northern section that, whether or not you change the minimum lot size, I think those are issues that can actually be discussed separately, but I think you should allow the same opportunities where appropriate that the southern section would have for those neighborhood services.
I think Peter in the back of it first.
Okay, so one of the what we were thinking about this is, and I'm not opposed to the idea of having this all green, but I think the thought was that in this TVR area there really is less commercial opportunity, and to try to preserve some of those, especially along Hartford and Bigelow Ave, preserve those as housing and not convert them to business. But I mean, if the sentiment of the people in the room is that you'd like to see TMD, which is the green section, pushed into there, I have no problem with that. I think the idea was that this is really more residential, as opposed to the area around the pond, which is more commercial based.
Bring it up here, Peter.
Thank you. In the Saturday session that we had in February, that was one of the key points that came out across all the little discussion groups. And I kind of interpreted that as more architectural based, where a house that had a former storefront from days gone by would be allowed to have a business in that storefront house. It was up in the TVR district. And I think that was one of the things that we wanted to preserve, that opportunity. Is that right? I mean, I thought that's what we had said. The other thing is going back to the goals, in the first slide that you had, what I found was there wasn't really anything that was new economics driven. We talked about having an opportunity to increase economic development in the village. And when I read the goal, it just seems to be confined to the existing infrastructure, if you will, nothing new. So that, to me, would eliminate if somebody wanted to have, along the waterfront, stream of stores and maybe some apartments or condos up top, within the restrictions, of course. So I think that needs to be maybe restated a little differently so we can expand the use along the riverfront for mixed commercial and residential and general use.
One of the things we did here for this mixed-use district was the idea of live workspace, and I wanted to just touch on that a little bit because it's not home occupation. It's an actual business where somebody is living adjacent to it or on top of it, much like your concept of the retail on the first floor, so that you could have more substantial business operations going where you could actually have employees, a certain number of employees available for that kind of business. So we're talking about something that, yes, that works beyond the existing TVC district to actually make it much more of the opportunity. And this is where our market specialist said, you do have an opportunity for the live workspace right now. And that's something that you could take advantage of if you had the right support and the right with the zoning in place that allows it. So that's, we did try to address that point, and by expanding the commercial opportunities and going beyond. We did not put it on the riverfront in this particular concept. And that's something I want to hear more about. If anybody else has other opinions as to the mixed-use development of the riverfront.
And actually, I would add as well that you have to think about too the you know, when you get into these neighborhoods, as Roger had alluded to, you got tight streets with not a lot of parking. So you don't want customer-oriented businesses in those tight areas. You know, those are more appropriate for the high streets, the Pearl Streets, North Main Street. But the live-in workspace that Ken is talking about is probably more appropriate on the side streets.
Right, that's correct. I think she had her hand up first.
Someone hasn't spoken.
Hi. Just to talk about the rail station, which is going to be built. In order, from everything we've learned as we've gone to these transit-oriented development sessions, regional and national experts say that in order to have a successful intermodal station, train station, people to use your buses, you have to create a population around that train station. So to have Enfield to put all that money into a train station without a demographic to use it seems like a humongous waste.
We've done a lot of TOD in cities, in small communities, and the fact is they're all different. And it doesn't necessarily play out in a town of this size that you have everybody walking to the train station. That's the reason why we have parking facilities. And that's why transit facilities have large parking facilities. And what we try to do in a suburban area is try to figure out how much parking makes the most sense for that particular location. Because people still drive, and most of these stations have, rule of thumb, about a 5-mile radius, which is the area of collection of people that come in to access it.
According to our commissioner of DOT, James Redeker, your 5 is right, but it's a 5-minute walk.
A 5-minute walk as well.
Yes.
Yes, people within 5-minute walk are going to walk over to there.
Right.
So
That's why I'm saying.
Yes.
So I think we basically agree.
Yes, I think so too.
Just to, again, to add to what Peter was saying and the gentleman over here, and what I had said about the potential mixed uses, I think what Peter says makes sense, that there are limited areas for the mixed use, and it's probably best to restrict where the green area would be added into the beige area. I just can't remember the numbers. They're too damn small to read.
I need my glasses too.
Yeah, because mostly, I mean, they're not that far. There are 4 places on the north side and close to Alden Avenue. 1 or 2 on Church, 2 on Alden Avenue, and then I think the old bakery may be a couple blocks north. So it might not be a good thing to add that potential option or as of right to the whole area. If you can do it without spot zoning and, you know, add it, you know, so that it's connected to the other green sections. And as far as parking, Peter, I think the issue with client or customers coming to those smaller areas, you probably handle that by the use categories allowed in the smaller ones, so that, you know, you're not going to have more than 1 or 2 people driving there, and the rest of it's going to be neighborhood oriented where people are walking there.
Lori Longi. I had a question on the TVR district. On the green, it went all the way to Route 5, but in the other district, it stops shy of Route 5. Why would you incorporate up to Route 5 in some areas and not in the others?
Because there's existing business zoning along the. If you look at the map on the left, you'll see where the existing in the dark maroon is the existing business districts.
Yeah, that's not where I'm talking. I'm talking like you left out this whole like block of area. Like this is kind of in no man's land, and these two you just left out. I just wondered why.
Because those are undeveloped properties right now. They're under the existing R33, and they could potentially be developed according to that district. What we were trying to do was trying to make the existing development work better under the zoning and not the R33 zoning. So that's the purpose for finding those particular boundaries and leaving out those chunks. We didn't try to rezone the whole town. What we tried to do is just deal with where that existing development was, with the idea that we're trying to get better zoning in place to try to encourage that reinvestment and revitalization of those and high quality life. Could be. Yeah.
Good evening. Thank you for your presentation. Frank Alamo, Chief of Thompsonville Fire Department. Been working there for 33 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And congratulations to you, too. You are our third group that's studied Thompsonville. So there's 2 other, 5th group, a few other groups before you. And I'm not sure what your whole charge is to the town, because I didn't read the RFP, but I'm wondering if there's a piece of your work that's going to talk about implementation, how we can get these things going, not just to change the zoning, because, like I said, you're the 3rd company here. Nothing's happened yet. I'm still waiting. We lost a tremendous amount of buildings and taxable properties after redevelopment. What's happened now is this area has become a drag on the rest of the town. The values are down, so it's a drag. So do you have in your report, or at the end of your report, are you supposed to be able to give information on how we can get investment, what kind of investment we can get? Because I just hope this isn't going to be another plan. That's not nothing's going to happen. So I'm hoping for some direction.
Right, and the idea of other actions that have to take place, we've already had discussions with the town, with Peter, Jose, others, about other programs that should be in place to advance the redevelopment and revitalization. Our most important, we're taking off one chunk at a time though, and in this case it's the zoning and trying to make the zoning right. At the end of our report, we'll lay out, we'll outline the other actions that should be taking place as well to make sure that the rest of it falls into place. But our charge was really focused on that idea of what makes the most sense from the aspect of zoning, which is one of two major directions that the town can start to have an effect on redevelopment. One is in capital program and investment in infrastructure. The other is in the land use and the zoning regulations. And so we're hitting one of two that the town can take place. Now, there are other programs that the town could start to offer, incentives and other opportunities and try to make it more attractive to come in and redevelop and revitalize as well too. Those are items that we won't flesh out completely because that wasn't our charge, but we'll give some ideas as to how that could be structured.
Okay, so on infrastructure, we have had some improvements with the roads projects that we've had in town. So with that, we've gotten some new water mains, new roads, new sidewalks. I don't know if you've toured the area or not, but and that work continues. There's going to be another phase this year. But again, to get people to invest, to get people to want to spend money, I heard a comment about can people turn them into condos, where a first-time home buyer, a first-time buyer can be side by side with another person, both owning, not just one person owning. Mm-hmm. You know, something like that. Would that be allowed in your report for a way to have people come in and invest?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Okay, and
part of that depends on the market, where the market is going, and what the opportunities are. You can't necessarily force it one way or the ownership option, unless there's some incentive that's provided, a quid pro quo that you provide something from the town, and you ask for something in return, and all this, and that works through the zoning as well too.
So with Bigelow, it was in the mid '80s, and we all thought that it was going to be a spin-off. So I think they spent at that time $50 million. Marty will be able to tell you more about that, but there was no spin-off. I mean, they dumped a ton of money in that area, and no other spin-off whatsoever. No other construction, complete. You know, the running down of the properties continued. So I would really like to see something happen. Now, there is something happening. I'm not sure if you know that possibly a new fire station is going to be built. More than possible.
I've been following that closely.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if a government, now, in your opinion, does government buildings like that help the economy down here? Would that make people see something going on at I mean, is that a start to something?
Yes, it is help. One of the value of it is there's new construction going on in the village center. The fact that you're just moving it from one location to another within the village lessens some of the impact of new people coming in, which is part of what we're talking about here, getting more people into this area as well too, just visitors as well as residents coming back in, and you won't have that particular value. But what you do have is value with the new fire station is that new construction and new value and new improvements that take place on the property.
So some incentive to private companies maybe to take a look in this area. There's a lot of concepts that are being floated around about the old station. In your professional opinion, do you think that there would be an interested buyer, commercial?
If I was a restaurateur, I would put a restaurant in there next as soon as you vacate it.
Okay.
Put some offices up above.
So there is some potential with that. But again, I would like to see you guys come up with some good recommendations for planning and zoning and the council and help them implement. So you being the third company to come into Thompsonville and do a study, something will happen. That's what we need. We need stuff to start happening.
All right. There's a couple hands in the back.
Thank you.
The fire station obviously has some interest.
I've been reading about business incentive zones, which would, of course, require the council to take some action. Would you have an opinion on that as far as the downtown area?
As a business improvement district, or?
Well, business, there's an incentive, a business incentive zone, and it would require the council to give tax breaks and so forth for businesses that would locate in that area.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I can tell you stories about people, towns that have decided that they were going to put, one town, I think it was in South Carolina, said, we're going to pay $5,000 for every artist that comes and lives in town. It is now an artist colony, a community, and it's booming because of the artists that are there. That idea of incentives, if you have the resources to do it, and it's properly targeted, then it could be very successful.
The Hartford was doing something for, I don't know if it's down in the front street or down in the downtown area with, I don't know if they're getting federal or state funds, similar to encourage small businesses to relocate.
Absolutely, and the idea of bringing in businesses that are potentially marginal but start to create activity and get new types of businesses in as well too is enormously helpful.
It's been talked about people for people. You have a couple of condos down there where the old Bigelow houses, where they have four. They were, well, I'm sorry. Okay, on Pleasant Street, where they did. Well, they aren't condos. They're co-ops, right? But each person owns their particular section. If there's four, then there's four separate owners. And that was allowed, well, I don't know how many years ago we did that.
That's a great idea.
I know one of the things that our group at the, when we met at 100 High Street, we talked about Thompsonville as a destination. Because, I know, Frank, you've been talking about the number of years of nothing happening down here, and really what's here to bring people down here. People have really rediscovered water. They want to be near the water. We have a riverfront, very underutilized riverfront, and it is really one of the most important pieces of this project is to open up the riverfront and get people down there, because that will bring people to Thompsonville. Even if they're riding a bike, at least they're here, and they can see what's going on, and that will bring more people. So, there's been a lot of debate about allowing people access to the riverfront, but it is really our best resource here, and we need to do something to get people down there.
Just really quickly on what Frank was saying too, I agree that we can't keep having studies. Yours is the best, by the way. I've read them all. Fabulous. You're welcome. But you're right. We need to start implementing. But the way that happens is from meetings like this and from people getting interested and spreading the word, because you're right. If somebody doesn't come in and invest their money, it's useless. But that's not your job. Obviously, that's our job. Our job is to get the word out. Talk to your friends. Talk to other business owners if you're a business owner. If you're a landowner, talk to your neighbors. Whatever it takes, because if people do not get interested, the town council isn't going to move on something that they don't feel the town wants. That's their job is to represent us. And if we're not putting a face forward that we want this to happen, we're done sitting on our hands, we want it to move, nothing's going to change, because you're right. It is a drag on the economy, but other things need to happen as well. And I think most folks who own property in Thompsonville, if you're interested and you're out and you're watching this on TV or whatever, you're doing things right already. It's getting everybody else to do things right in Thompsonville. It's making sure that codes are enforced. It's making sure that zoning laws are enforced. And the people on the street, they're doing their best. The people that we employ are doing a great job. But we may need to invest some more resources in that stuff to make sure that the properties down there are being cared for, to make sure that the people who are renting out, apartments and things, that they're taking care of their properties so that your property is worth more. My property, I don't have property, but so that all the properties down there increase in value. That happens from people taking the time to fix something when it's broken. Make sure that it is historically accurate if you're in that zone. Things like that, but that only happens if we get involved. and we've seen a big uptick, and if it continues, I think that we will have the change that everyone's been waiting for in Thompsonville. But it's up to us. It's not up to any study. It's not up to anything else. It has to be the people on the ground showing the rest of the town that this is important. Really, that's the only way it's going to change.
Thank you. That kind of cheerleading speech is exactly what's needed.
One point I'd like to make about the riverfront, I think you may want to put some parameters around what type of things are going to happen there. When I hear riverfront access, I automatically think of recreation. And that's a good thing. But it's not really going to drive any real money. So I would advocate putting parameters around what we mean by that. Because really the big thing here is, if you want to make T-ville a destination, you got to have something to go to. And is it going to be like, go down to East Hartford, they got their riverfront there. You go across the river to Hartford, they got their riverfront there. Nice places to walk, but nobody's spending any money. So I would think that we really want to put some parameters. I'm not going to advocate either one, but I'm just bringing up a point. If you want to do something, we got to sit there and we ought to have parameters around that. And then the developers will understand the parameters, and then they can put forth proposals to meet those parameters. And yeah, I'm not saying not have green space and recreational space. You have a limited number of space. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't want to go hang around the Connecticut River. I don't want to see stuff coming down from Bondi's Island, to be honest with you. But the serious point is, I think it's got to generate revenue and make this a destination point, whatever you do.
One of the things about public access, if it actually is a destination location, if it actually does attract people, and they walk around, they're doing something, they spend money on gas. They buy food. If there's a nice restaurant in the old fire station, they might just stop there and have some lunch. It's something where you get an attraction that's a regional attraction. You'll pull a different market to the location. It doesn't have to be everybody that lives within a 5-minute walk. It can be people that actually drive to that location as well. Go ahead.
I have to agree. As far as waiting to fix Thompsonville with government money, government programs, it's never going to work. You put up a bike path, there's no money coming to Thompsonville unless you build a bike path toll booth and you charge them. But other than that, the only thing down there, and I see it declining, I own a business there, you've got 740 people living in Bigelow, and if you put a coffee shop across the street, nobody will go in there and buy a coffee. So the thing is, you need to build the riverfront like Springfield, Hartford. Look at the riverfronts that invested. Let the private developer come in, and Marty's property is perfect. Get a restaurant there. Get a marina. Let the private industry and private investors, they're the smartest people around, not the government. The government's always broke, state, local, and they can't make a dime. They don't even earn an income. So why are we waiting all these projects and all these touchy-feely? The train station I've been hearing for 25 years, it's coming now, the rails. Let the private developer come into Thompsonville, let them develop the riverfront, restaurants. Springfield's booming. You go there on weekends. They got everything you want there. We go there all the time. We leave Enfield. There's nothing to leave us to come to Thompsonville to spend 10 cents. And he's got it. He's absolutely right. The bike path is not going to bring money to Thompsonville. There's nothing. Who's going to come down there on a bike and do what? I don't understand it. It's crazy. If we think that the government money and programs are going to help. Thank you.
Other thoughts? One of the things about is what we're trying to do with this zoning is allow the market to make decisions about what's most appropriate for the properties, and not be too restrictive with it. That was one of the concepts that we had for doing the zoning. So I just want to make that clear as well too. The government can get out of the way at the right times.
No, I agree with Peter. Peter, thank you for that. And the riverfront is important. But when you're done, have a page or two in there of how to do it, examples, how to market it. Maybe we need to market it. The riverfront would be awesome. It would be awesome, and I think people would come. But if the bike path led to the riverfront where the coffee shop is, hopefully, then people will come. So you don't want the bridge to nowhere. You want the bike trail to go somewhere.
Right.
So right. That would be So help us develop. Help us in a way, in your professional way, to develop it. Give us suggestions or help the council and the Planning and Zoning Commission move forward. Because again, you know, we keep seeing, and you're doing a great job, but we've seen 3 of these already. I'm sure you read them.
That's right.
I was on the first Thompsonville Revitalization Committee. There's a study from Russell Gibson Van Dolen. It's 1991, I think it was, or even maybe earlier. So let's implement these things, you know. So thank you.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Well, it's 8:30 now. We've spent an hour and a half talking. Not everybody had a chance to talk. I don't know if you all had to have your opinions or ideas. As Jose said, the conversation can continue. You can let your comments be known to Jose. You can even contact me if you want directly about your ideas and opinions. We'll be open to any additional discussion. Of course, there's a more process that has to occur. We have to get the regulations developed in a form that can go through the formal process of hearings and decisions on how that zoning should take place. But that's hopefully in the near-term future, after we have resolved what we think is the most appropriate consensus towards what the future of Thompsonville Village should be. So thank you very much for your input. Do you have anything?
I just want to thank you for coming out tonight, and I don't know, can we make this available as either?
We can put this online, sure.
Yeah, if you
I'll
can send me either a PowerPoint, and if for those of you that don't have a PowerPoint, I can convert it to a PDF, and for the people that weren't here, I'll try to post it on our webpage. There is a webpage. Again, I just want to remind everyone, if you go to the Town of Enfield webpage under Planning and Zoning Department, there is a separate webpage for the Thompsonville Zoning Study. I'm going to try to get as much information, even drafts. I think I've put everything that I've gotten so far there unedited. So we're trying to keep this open and a conversation, so people can call my office, email me, whichever way you feel comfortable communicating, stopping by and just chatting for half an hour if you want to. We're always open. So thank you again for coming.
Thank you all.